Bueno, and hola familia and bienvenidas. Welcome back to another episode of Tech and Tequila. This is the podcast where we break down tech that can help you actually run your business, minus too much technological jargon. So we're not going to overwhelm you with a bunch of acronyms or things where you're like, what are they talking about? And as always, with a little tequila energy, because we want you to enjoy your tech, just like you should enjoy a good tequila. And today we are talking about something every business these days has. And I don't want to say almost nobody truly understands, but it's more like everybody uses it, but maybe they're not taking deep dives into what exactly they have, how much they're spending. I think a lot of people are like, we set it and then we forget it unless there's an issue. And that is your wireless. So that's your cell phones, tablets, hotspots. And these monthly bills, they show up and sometimes they just keep growing. Or I always like to say, I have clients that just keep paying them until all of a sudden one day it's like this huge jump and they're like, whoa, what happened? Because we haven't looked at it. But if I would be remiss, of course, I am joined today by Casey from OpDecision, also known in the channel as the cell phone bill whisperer. So Casey, welcome to Tech and Tequila.
Thank you so much for having me, Kat. I am super pumped about being here today.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Now, before we get into the meat and potatoes, we have to have our tequila moment because it's been a long week already. And I think it's only Wednesday that we're recording this. As I said earlier, I'm super excited because I am headed to West Texas to do the Midland Hispanic Chamber of Commerce's Business Expo tomorrow. But we always take a moment because what would Tech and Tequila be without a little tequila? And today we are sipping on the Pantalones tequila. This one is the Extra Anejo, and it says Organico, also known as organic. And of course, this is a limited release. Why is it a limited release? That is because, of course, it's something special. They have a few more out. They may be out by the time you listen to this. So I'm sorry if that's the case, but you can still go grab Pantalones. And you can grab Pantalones, I would say almost everywhere for sure in Texas, right? If you haven't had this particular one before, this one is going to be bold, it's going to be refined, and of course, it's aged to perfection. Now, you'll notice with this one, it's going to have some layers to it. And as always, you're going to get a kick, but not a burn. And I honestly feel like because this has layers, this is the perfect parallel to today's conversation, because wireless is one of those things that a lot of businesses, like I said, they set it, they forget it, and then all of a sudden they get this huge bill and they're like, whoa, what happened? How did we get here? And you want to take a time to look under the hood, obviously with all your tech, but in particularly with your wireless. And when you do, you look, there's a step, there's this nuance, and usually there's a couple of things that might surprise you, right? So before we get into it, salud.
Salud.
We'll give that a taste. I am a big fan of Pantalones, by the way.
Okay.
And not just because it's, co-owned and co-produced by Matthew McConaughey and his beautiful wife. But that does give it a little bit of a Texas, I would say Texas / and I want to say his wife is Brazilian vibe to it,
Okay.
A little niceness there. But, all right, Casey, let's get into it. Now, before we get into the nitty gritty, let's set the stage. So why don't you kind of tell us a little bit about yourself? And then, of course, how did you get into the world of wireless optimization and what led you to where you're at now?
I would love to. I wouldn't be doing myself a good service if I didn't say that I first started in the connectivity space at 11 by having a pager. Ever since then, I've just been extremely immersed in connectivity and technology. And I myself started my career in the retail wireless space, where I owned a chain of retail prepaid Boost Mobile stores in Baltimore City. And it was a wonderful way for me to be able to support retail clients. And I stepped a little bit into the B2B world. And in 2021, I made a decision to join OpDecision, which was really exciting because of what we do and how we do it. And I'm really excited to share how there are ways to be able to do things a little bit differently in wireless that perhaps the traditional advisor or IT person may just not be aware about.
No, I love that. You and I both came from kind of that space, because originally back in the day, I was with, and this is going to tell you back in the day when dinosaurs roamed the technology earth. I came from Southwestern Bell Cellular, that then became Singular, that then became AT&T. So I get it. Now, for anyone who's listening who might not be familiar yet, per se, with OpDecision, can you actually break down like who OpDecision is, what they do, and what problems you guys solve for your customers?
So OpDecision has been in business for about 20 years, which in mobility is like an entire century because of the change and evolution that's happened in mobility itself. We swim in two different lanes. The most primary lane we swim in is optimization. So we take a client's existing spend with their wireless carrier, AT&T, Verizon are the most popular ones we play with, and we find ways to reduce the cost without changing their carrier, their device, their SIM card. There's absolutely zero disruption. And of course, that is very welcomed in a industry where typically there's a lot of rip and replace that needs to happen in order to achieve cost reduction. In the solution that we offer, we have very unique ways to achieve that within their same carrier with, and I say zero disruption. That's the primary lane. The secondary lane, which we launched a few years ago, was as a result of clients wanting to continue to do business with us after we found ways to save them real dollars. And so we started a managed service around wireless where we essentially can offer procurement, technical support, be an outsourced solution to a client's mobility infrastructure. We can be on a consultative piece or more of a day-to-day operating piece. And so in those two different lanes is where we're supporting clients directly around simplifying mobility and making it as least chaotic as possible.
Well, I was going to really tell you, when you had the first section where you were talking about not having to change your devices, not having to change your SIM card, you were literally speaking my love language. Because that, I always tell people, whether it's, electronic logging or, new internet, nobody wants to do the lift part. They just want it to like magically work. They just are like, we just want it to all work. I don't want to have to do all that. So you're speaking to my love language. Now, as I said, you're known as the cell phone bill whisperer. So I have to ask you, what is one of the most common or shocking mistakes you see that companies are making, per se, with their wireless bills?
I think the wow thing for me that's most common is folks coming into conversations thinking that they have the best and not being able to consider outside of the box options. And what I mean by that is, clients and carriers, they want to get the same bill every month, right? They don't want anything to go up ever. When it goes down, great. There's usually some sort of problem. I mean, think about the last time anybody's ever called you and said, hey, I got a lower price for you. Do you want to sign up for that? It's just not something that happens. And so where I find the most interesting thing with clients is, they said, oh, we negotiated everything great. And, we've got the best opportunity. And then we find 50 devices that are not being utilized, or in some cases, hundreds. And I don't think it's necessarily anyone trying to do anything malicious. I just think there is just not this marriage between the data of a device that's given to a team member and how that's connected to the rest of the IT infrastructure. And with the help of some tools that we have, like Forge OS, we provide a really interesting way of visibility that is something the carriers just aren't able to do on a regular basis.
I love what you were just talking about, Casey, because, it's kind of like, I'm going to keep reiterating it. So if you're taking shots because I keep talking about the same story, I'm sorry for your liver. But, I think one thing that people a lot of times don't think about is the rate and usage can constantly change, right? Plans, contract, data needs, it never sits still. So how does OpDecision help business, number one, validate the rates, say you're on the right plan, or, how do you adjust if like their needs change? And obviously, for any business, having predictability and control instead of having, like I said, that big bill that shows up like all of a sudden, or having to react, how do you guys help with that?
So I would say the single most thing that we do is the mid-cycle management piece to an account. And so let's say a client comes to us and they're doing an optimization project where we're helping them reduce costs. It's typically over 12 months. From there, each month, we are digging into the account about 5 to 7 times throughout each month to ensure what we've prescribed and what's actually happening are matching the result that we're expecting. And so I know what is delivering the results here is the fact that we have an analyst that is looking at these custom reports that have been produced by the Forge OS portal and making recommendations and then taking action on it proactively instead of waiting for the bill cycle to close and then be left with a big pile of what, which we don't want. And so how we find ways to be able to be ahead of that is last few days of the month, looking at that bill, looking at the consumption, and just making sure everything is where it needs to be. That's the single most way.
And it really leads into the next thing that I was actually going to ask you about, because, obviously teams grow, things change, data goes, and I've dealt with lots of companies where they have huge data bills or they have multiple locations and all these things. And they're like throwing phones everywhere. What do you guys do that helps to make sure that they're optimizing the processes that they have in place, help with implementation, obviously, and make sure that, they're paying for what they need and how many devices like they actually need to utilize? Like, I guess, what is the threshold? Like a device might go offline for like 1-2 weeks, maybe even 3, like someone's on vacation, whatever, taking extended leave. But at what point do you guys say, hey, we see these devices, they're not being used, like what's going on?
So we like to do something called a scream test. And so when we do an audit on an account, we identify devices that haven't been used for a certain period of time. Sometimes they're months. And what's critical here is with the healthcare systems that we work, those devices are mission critical. And so an example of where our value and our technology comes in to play is inside of the Verizon portal. For AT&T portal, you have, of course, the ability to name that device and so forth. With the way that we marry the carrier data and the user data into a single pane of glass using the Forge OS tool, that is providing visibility beyond anything that any carrier portal is going to be able to do. Now, that's not even the exciting part here. The exciting part here is that we then can produce a report that goes to either an IT person or a HR person and say, hey, we see these 4 people are no longer active in your HR directory. And so there's a light that goes off and says, wait, I forgot to turn these devices off. So we are proactively providing this report to the client, but we take it a step further. We'll go ahead and turn off those devices and do that for the client. And then on our monthly audit that we do, there's a time where we just kind of go through that and say, is this relevant? Is that relevant? And this is being done on a consistent basis. So, of course, with every person being pulled in a million different directions, our core product and value is around mobility. We're going to do it for you behind your back so you don't have to worry about it.
Got it. I love that, because you're speaking these are all my love languages: consistency, proactive, like looking for the client, If
there's one more thing I can mention on that, Kat, I think, in a day and age where everyone speaks to AI and technology, there is a very important human component to what we do. And so the account executives that are assigned to the clients are with us tenured anywhere from 5 to 10 years in mobility and within the company. And so we learn beyond what a machine can learn of how your account works and how the mind thinks of the person managing it, to kind of bridge those gaps that the carrier just doesn't do a really great job at doing. And that's okay. They do awesome at giving service. We need them to focus there. It's companies like us that provide this extra support to make it just a little bit easier, keep that client happy with their existing carrier, and make it so that their bills aren't exploding or unpredictable.
I love that, because one of the things that you're talking about is, tenure of the people that are working on your account. And I cannot tell you the number of times I'm working with somebody, and we won't name names, but they're the bigger cell phone carriers, and they're like, I got an email from somebody and they say they're my new rep. I just got an email 3 months ago. Like, how long has this person been here? And that makes, I like to say craziness, but it's having to tell this story over and over again. Like, this is who we are. This is what we do. Those things. It can be crazy. One thing I didn't hear you cover, but I am curious is, these carriers, sometimes they have errors, right? Yeah. And obviously, you're talking about you guys checking it periodically throughout the month and once the bill is out. So there's, a little bit to that. Lots of these carriers have limitations. And we just talked about changing staffing, things like that. Can you explain how OpDecisions, like inventory management, their analytics, like the single sign-on platform, helps to clarify and simplify that for the customer?
So I love calling the Forge OS operating system a truth portal. And the reason I say that is because, as I mentioned earlier, we're taking secure data chunks from either an HR system or Active Directory from the client, and we're taking that carrier data and marrying it in a way that allows visibility that the carrier just simply does not have. And I'll give you an example of that. If you have a device that you have active and then you decide to disable it for, let's say 3 months, suspend it, for 3 months. After a certain period of time, that device and their history is no longer available inside the carrier portal. Understandable, they need space, they want to keep things clean. With us, we keep that history forever. And so as you're moving things around and you're shifting things around, if Betty had IMEI ending in 342, but then she was issued another device, all of that tracking with the device and the line it was on is all historically available in the Truth Portal or the Forge OS tool. And so the client itself has the ability to log into this portal and have that visibility and the robustness of that without having to do any work to make sure that data is accurate, as we're doing that on the back end. But beyond that, we certainly don't want to push anybody to have to engage with another tech stack. So as part of our service, when we learn the account and what is important to that person managing it, we'll produce these custom reports, say a cost allocation report or a no use line report. And we'll go ahead and send that over to them in a way that's easily digestible and makes it so that they don't have to spend the time doing this. And the soft cost savings here around these processes is very hard to be able to quantify sometimes. But I know that whoever is managing it certainly is thankful that they don't have to manually go into their carrier portal, pull a report, chop it up, send it, and really not even have that true visibility of their entire mobility infrastructure.
I love that. I love the Truth Portal idea. And I can tell you, as someone who mistakenly one time asked one of my customers, just print out a copy of that bill for me. And that bad boy was like 4 inches thick with detailed calling. And I was like, what am I supposed to do with that? So, I'm manually going through, picking out page with how many minutes to divide it myself, because like I say, I've been in the tech space since dinosaurs roamed the earth, it feels like. But, I love what you were touching base on. And that is, depending on the size of a business, right? I mean, first off, if you're a larger business, you're doing lots of things with a very tiny IT staff, right? And then if you're a smaller business or medium-sized business, you may still have a huge wireless spend, right? What do you see like with onboarding, troubleshooting, like that you guys help to remove some of that administrative burden that someone may have, especially if it's like some random office manager or this person, they're like, you're the most techie person in the office. You are going to handle our wireless service now.
I'll say this is very industry vertical dependent, but I'll share a little story of a client I'm working with right now. And so they are a manufacturer and they have a fleet of devices throughout the US, and they have some salespeople that travel globally. And this poor person was spending probably, I don't know, a few hours a month going through hundreds of lines and turning on international and turning off, and, because they didn't want to pay the fee and this and that. And so what we were able to do was eliminate them having to do that on a regular basis due to some custom reporting that we were able to produce for them. And I think the most effective way to leverage OpDecision is to let us be the ones to do the work. And so there are some folks who are, very comfortable with some of the day-to-day things and, feel like they need to own that piece to the business. And of course, there is this, beginning part where we have to learn and get comfortable. You get comfortable and there's a trust that's built. But once that's there, and it's usually around the second month, because once they see that first audit, they're like, I didn't even know you could look for this stuff. And I said, well, this is, how we're doing it. And every month you're going to get this report. And do you want us every month now to take the action for you? And so it's that doing it with you piece to mobility that, you want to exist with your carrier, but unfortunately the carriers are just not set up to do that. And I think that is something that our clients value very much about working with us.
I love that because you keep touching on everything that I'm about to talk about. So it's working out perfectly.
That's because we're on the same wavelength, Kat. We're both mobility people. We're reading each other's minds right now.
Yes, because I was just thinking about where, if somebody is comfortable, they can manage certain aspects, right? But nobody wants to be, tied to a desk or turning things on and off. And we don't want to talk, like I say, we don't want to talk. We don't want anyone to experience like a service disruption because something is missed or they forgot to turn something on and all of a sudden somebody's like overseas in like, London, England, wherever, and their bill's like $9,000, So what solutions do you have kind of that help with that to simplify, process flow, eliminate per se late fees, and of course, obviously service interruptions?
So I would say the account executive interacting directly with the carrier on the client's behalf eliminates a lot of that worry that they had before. So throughout the optimization project with a client, we are doing these audits, getting approvals from the client, going and doing the work to the carrier. That, time that it takes to do that was, if for this particular case, was quite abnormal, but they had a very specific, use case for this. But that was one example of a way that we were able to fix that for them and just eliminate the time. I think another way that we find clients can value some of the visibility is, and just the late fees, is just having awareness. And so when we do these deep dive audits each month, there are some controllable costs that we just can't change, like a device payment, taxes, fees, things like that. But there's changes to consumption, a rate plan mischosen, a client got a new device and put them on a different plan that didn't align with the consumption. We're catching these every second that it's happening, and we're taking action proactively. That is really where the clients are benefiting from what we do.
Love that because, I have been the person that, like that changed a rate plan, and then they had like a sudden change in services, and then it like went crazy. So I love that optimization, and that was a great story right there. And I'm sure you have some more. So let me ask you a question. What is a really good success story that you can share where the client's savings or clarity was way bigger than what they originally expected with you guys?
Yeah, so I had a company that was a port services company, and essentially they had crews at all the ports throughout the country, and they were managing some of the logistics there. And they had a situation where they had multiple carriers. And what's great about the Forge OS portal is it is this single pane of glass that allows you to have visibility of each of your carriers. And we got through the initial pre-qualification where we said, I think, we found about 32% in savings, I think, which was really exciting. It was a few $1,000s a month for the client in savings. And they were like, great, let's go ahead. And so we ended up starting the project. And as a part of the initial piece to the onboarding is we do a really deep dive into the account. And so with having 3 accounts, sometimes that can take up to 1 to 2 weeks. And we're combing through months and months of, different consumption and bills. And so we ended up coming in at like 46% in savings at the time of the initial optimization. And that was a remarkable example of how going and combing through the past few months and looking at this consumption of each line, we were able to then come up with a prescription that led to 46% in savings month over month, which again, it was just incredible. So at the point that we got involved, there was one person that was managing it, and they were spending all these times doing cost allocation reports. And no wonder they didn't have time to look at whose device is active. This person is going and doing 100 gigabytes of data one month, and that's blowing up data pools and all this stuff. So remember, we talked about chaos, Kat, and in mobility, you love that. You got to live and breathe it. So we took it, we collected all of it together, and we found a way to make a soup out of it. And that soup that we then served to the client was much more easily digestible for them to be able to manage on a regular basis. And so beyond that, we finished the optimization project. We ended up going into a managed service with them so that they wouldn't have to continuously do this, because they had a lot of turnover and they were really slow to turn off devices, and people were giving their kids tablets to use on vacation and just all this chaos. And then we found a way to deliver to them every month, a way for them to say, hey, you might want to talk to this guy, you might want to talk to this person. And we were able to control their bill in a way that I 32% I was happy with. But when we came back with 46, I was like, all right, let's keep going.
I know, I can only imagine any of my clients would be my clients would be happy with a 5 to 10% savings. Yeah. So when you're talking about like 46%, they're like night and day, night and day, So I think you really answered my next question. But if there is any way to, I like to say, hit that home run for somebody, if you know of a business owner or the person in charge of the wireless setup and they have not checked it in years and they're thinking, we're probably fine. I don't think they can find 46%. We don't have that many. What's one thing that you would want them to rethink or be like, yes, let me go ahead and look and let me see what this is all about?
I actually had a client that recently signed an agreement 3 months before I got involved. And you can have checked your bill 3 years ago, 3 months ago. If you don't have it right, it's not going to matter. And so just doing a pre-qualification and looking at what you have and having a third party give you an assessment without any sort of commitment. I would love, and I do sometimes, bring back the answer, you're in a great place. I have to do that in 2 days. I have a meeting with a client. They have a great setup. Everything is awesome, but here's where they're missing, and that's visibility and the cost allocation reporting. So I think it's not always necessarily just about those hard dollars, which of course is something we'd love to save, but there is a soft dollar component here. So doing a free assessment by any third party just to understand where you're at is the most beneficial thing that you're going to be able to do for your wireless bill.
I love it. I love it. Because I think you made a good point. And that is that while, a success story like saving 46% is wonderful and amazing, but also if someone comes to you and you're like, hey, you're on the right plan, everything looks good, then first off, you're telling them that. And second off, then they're in the knowing, which we all want to know that our tech is set up correctly and working, right?
100%.
Now, first off, I want to tell you thank you so much for being part of the podcast, because I always appreciate when people come on Tech and Tequila. But before we wrap, there's two things that I always talk about. One is, if there's one takeaway that you want for someone to think about, whether that's the business owner, the IT leader, the finance team to remember, what would that be? Like, what would you want them to remember?
From an OpDecision perspective? Or just a general life perspective? I will say from an OpDecision perspective and just a general third-party services is it's important to hear someone out, because I believe that you're going to be able to take a positive nugget of knowledge, and whether or not you decide to go with that solution provider or not is irrelevant, but to understand and to ask the right questions and to really find out if they can help, and give a third-party service provider who is vendor agnostic, like OpDecision, an opportunity to really peer in to what you have going on and give you an honest and open assessment of what you have. And being open to that around all the other chaos that being a leader and an IT person brings with it is take the time to know what's out there to make your life easier.
I love it. Take the time so that you can make your life easier. Yep. That is the most important thing to think about, right? Now, like I said, there's always two things I ask. And my second question is, if OpDecision was a tequila, would it be a blanco, a reposado, or an añejo, and why?
I'm going to say a reposado, if I said that right, because it is very smooth. I happen to like that type of tequila, but it has a bite. And when you're working with a solution provider that's a third party and vendor agnostic, you want it to be really smooth, but you want it to get the job done. And for me, that's what a reposado does.
Thank you. I love that answer, because you want things to be smooth, but you want, when there's a disruption, two things, right? You want it to be easily fixable. You want to know who to contact. And we talked several times about that. First and foremost, I want to thank you again for coming and hanging out with me today and breaking down something that every single business, I feel like these days, has. Lots of them think that they're handled, but you and I both know sometimes they're just setting it, forgetting it, and just waiting for that huge, ginormous bill. And nobody wants that, because that's going to make you drink. And we want you to enjoy your tequila at the end of the evening, not be like, my tech is making me drink. We want you to fall in love with your tech. So obviously, thank you for joining me on Tech and Tequila.
It was so much fun hanging out with you, Kat. Thank you so much for having me here today. It was a lot of fun.
Amelia, if this episode made you think, wow, we should probably look into our wireless, that is your sign to, number one, like, share, and of course, subscribe to this episode, because it helps to get the word out. And also it helps to educate additional business owners and other people in your company. Until next time, of course, stay smart, stay secure, and remember, great tech pairs beautifully with great tequila at the end of the evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode of Tech and Tequila. I hope you enjoyed our conversation today. To stay updated about all things tech and more, don't forget to visit us at our website, shelbyts.com. If you loved what you heard, remember to show your support by liking, sharing, and subscribing to our podcast. Your 5-star ratings and reviews mean the world to us and help us to reach more listeners just like you. So muchas gracias again for joining us with Tech and Tequila. Thank you so much. You learned a lot about tech, and maybe you had a nice drink of tequila.